Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power of Man podcast. My name's Rory Paquette, and I am, as always, your incredibly grateful host. Thank you so much for being here today. Love this, love my job, love being able to do this for a living, love being able to talk to every one of you. I'm not sitting here in this seat unless you're sitting over there in yours. So thank you, and thank you. We have a very special guest with us today. He's got a lot of cool things going on, and I think we're going to talk about some neat topics. I'm looking forward to introducing him. Before we do that, you guys all know the protocol. Got to pay a couple bills. That's how it goes. So I'm about to, and you know what's coming. Take a sip of my preferred beverage. And it's good every single time I do this, guys. I'm not even joking. And if you're a friend of the program, and you probably are, you know what it is. That's Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Deep, dark, rich, bold, and beautiful, just like my wife. They brew a mean bean. They do all the right things for all the right reasons. They support veterans, which is why we support them here at Power of Man. Look them up at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Tell them Power of Man sent you. Now, let's get to the meat of this podcast today. Let's get to it. We've got an awesome guy with us today. Please welcome to the show, 20 years experience as a counselor and author, Brady Daniel. Brady, how you doing?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for the opportunity to get to come and hang out and have a good conversation today.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here today. So,
Yes.
all right, you've got a lot going on. You have upcoming podcasts. You got a book that's out there already. We have a ton of stuff to talk about. But before we get into all that, let our listeners know kind of who is Brady, where you from, what do you do, why you here, brother?
Great. I have the opportunity of sitting across from amazing individuals and to hear their stories. And what empowers me to hear their story is because I've had my own personal story, and I'm constantly walking in that story to this very moment. The idea of a man that felt like he had two left feet, the opportunity of kind of just walking in circles, couldn't really get to point from point A to point B, and not understanding why that was. The disbelief that I had in myself, but also deeply caring about who God was, and not understanding the difference between acceptance and belief. And so I had the ability to work for an amazing church coming right out of college, and spending my first couple years as a licensed counselor in the church, learning about who Jesus is, the freedom, the transformative power that he offers, and getting to see all the amazing experiences that took place. And then about 2015, 17, excuse me, I was released from that position. And again, that was about the time that the economy, there's a lot going on during that time, and it made perfect sense just from a financial standpoint. And so when I left that job, I remember thinking in my head, how could they let me go? I mean, I'm amazing. What is going on with them, right? Of course, didn't have pride or anything like that.
Of
Again,
course not.
yeah, nothing like that. I mean, how dare them, right? And of course, God really got a hold of me, and He was like, "Hey, the plan doesn't change. The environment does, but the plan does not change." And I really didn't know if I wanted to go back in helping individuals because the one place I wanted to help them just let me go. And I remember going out to my in-laws' house, and God really put this vision of helping individuals in my heart. So I accepted it, but didn't believe in it. And so started the counseling practice. It really started taking off from the standpoint of me being able to pay the bills, but not actually paying myself. And really just frustrated with the idea of God, I'm doing all this, kind of actually being a martyr on behalf in God's eyes of, hey, I accepted this. I have a couch, I have insurance, I have all these different things. And God, you're not taking care of me. What is the deal? And through this process, God starts asking me a question. Hey, Brady, do you trust me? And I remember thinking, I'm not answering that question. What a ridiculous question. And again, here I am. I'm thinking, wow, I can't believe Brady, as I'm thinking back, that I actually talked to God that way. And it was about a 4 month process, maybe a little bit longer than that. And I remember one time, after being asked multiple times, being frustrated to the degree with this very question, I'm driving up to my office in Southlake. I get out of the office as I'm going in to be meeting with an individual, probably within the next 10 minutes. And I hear God put this question in my heart. And I throw down my bag and I'm pumping my fist towards heaven. Of course not. Is that what you want to hear from me? Of course not. And I'm sure I was quite a sight as people see me walk in this counseling office. They're like, okay, great. He must be the client. He's walking into the office. Good. Maybe whoever he's going to meet with, that somebody could help this guy. unbeknownst to them that I was actually the clinician that was going to be meeting with an individual. And I remember sitting in the chair thinking, oh my goodness, I don't trust God. And I remember sitting there for what seemed like an eternity and just staring out the window. And I remember God put in my heart, hey, we can talk about this. And I was like, what's there to talk about? I've got to get my stuff together. I've got an individual coming through the door. And he's like, it can wait. I really want you to talk to me about this. And I remember saying in my heart right there in that moment, I don't trust you, but I want to learn. And since that day on, have I gotten there? I've taken steps to get a lot closer. And in that moment in time, I learned the difference between agreeing with something that God has put before me and starting to believe in it. Consciously, I said, yes, God, I want to go after that. Subconsciously, because of the pain that I hadn't processed yet, it was really holding on. I was holding on to that pain, allowing myself to be really a victim to what I experienced instead of allowing God to come into that place, releasing that so I could actually start moving forward into what God had for me. And because I'm in this process and in this journey as myself, as a husband, as a dad, as a clinician, as a son, I get the opportunity of getting to sit across from amazing individuals and help them take next steps by acknowledging, okay, hey, what pain have you been through? And how do we acknowledge and own that so that not for and identify own that not from a place of identity but from a place of, hey, this is what I've experienced, so we can start inviting God into that pain so that we can start releasing it and transitioning from the message of the pain to the message of the cross and his identity for that individual so that they can actually start moving forward. And I have the best job in the world. I get to sit across from amazing individuals and walk alongside them during this process.
That's a lot. I mean, that's wonderful. I love the way that you so subtly put that out there because it's such a powerful distinction. If you ask anybody that's listening to this program, more than likely, yeah, do you believe in God? They're going to say, yeah. You know, how they do or how they worship, and that may be another conversation. But do you believe in God? They'll go, yeah. But if you ask them, do you trust God? I'm not
Mm-mm.
sure anybody would be able to answer that question. I mean, that's incredibly deep for as subtle as it is. And I love that you brought that up because it's a huge, huge distinction.
Yes, sir. And I think it's very similar to the orientation I think of Jesus asking Peter, "Hey Peter, do you love me?"
Mm.
And of course Peter kind of keeps putting it back. He keeps deflecting it. Yeah, well, you know that I do. Well, Peter, let's just dissect that. If he knows that you do, then why is it that he's asking you? And it was kind of, in essence, my own Peter-esque kind of story. And I'm throwing it back at Jesus. How ridiculous of a question is this, God? Why would you even be asking me? This is me, of course, right? Kind of that pride that I told you that I didn't have. And of course, I'm
Hmm.
highlighting it ever so magnified by the dynamic of, God, ridiculously, why are you even asking me this? Go ask somebody else that's dealing with this. And I'm so grateful because he stuck his finger right in the middle of an area that I needed so desperately so that he could actually make me aware of something that needed to be dealt with. And am I perfect in all areas? I'd love to say yes, I am, but I'm still in this process, taking this step every second of every moment of every day.
Interesting. So your entire practice is founded in faith, then?
It has the ability of that. What I mean by that is I don't, I meet with a lot of individuals coming out of the church,
Mhm.
meaning they've been wounded, they've been hurt, spiritual identity, church wounds, or whatever that may be. And so I work with a lot of believers, but I also work with a lot of non-believers as well, because I want to be able to help individuals who are coming out of the church or are part of a church to really help them process so that they understand that complexity of what does it mean to know who they are in Christ, but how do they trust God through whatever life experiences that they're going through? And then not only that, but to be able to testify and minister to those who may not know who God is. Or maybe they've experienced him in the past, and because they don't believe that he answered their prayer, then there must not be a God, or whatever that may be. And so I like to, in those moments, really talk about Jesus universally, the dynamic of love and peace and transformative power, utilizing the dynamics of the character and nature of who God is without really utilizing his name, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. You brought up a term I was going to ask you about in the podcast, so I'll just do it now.
Please.
You mentioned church wounds,
Yes.
and I haven't heard that said that way. I think I have an idea, but to make sure I do, and to tell anybody else who doesn't understand what that means, Church wounds.
Yes. Yes. Um, s- I remember hearing an individual who once said, I think it was out of California. He said that if you aren't close enough for me to step on your toes in this organization as a church member, then you're not close enough. You're not leaning in enough. And I remember thinking, oh wow, here's a pastor, and I wish I could remember who it was so I could give them credit that he's establishing the expectation that in life it's kind of like a dance, and it's not if you step on each other's toes, it's when you step on each other's toes. To what intensity do you step on each other's toes? And then it creates the opportunity of a good raw conversation. And for those of you all out there that are bad dancers like myself, you're probably going to step on a lot of people's toes quite often. And that's the reason why my wife and I don't really dance a whole lot, even though she loves dancing, is because I'll step on her toes the entire time when we go dancing. But the idea of that is we have the ability of doing life with one another. And doing life with one another can actually be messy in a lot of ways. And so how does that mess and the opportunity of me walking in the transformative nature and power of Jesus, but yet still walking in the areas that still need to be transformed. And how is that poking and how is that messing up other people's lives? Or what is it that I'm saying that probably I shouldn't have say? Or what is it that I'm doing that maybe I shouldn't be doing? And how that's impacting somebody else as a church member, or maybe even the times where I was a church staff member, and all of a sudden they looking back and saying, wow, this individual didn't meet with me, or they didn't acknowledge me, or whatever that may be, and how that's reflected from the church, and how they actually they reflect that onto God. So therefore, if the church hurt them, then guess what? God must not be as good as who he says he is. Or, I love God, but I don't love the organization. So therefore, guess what? You and I, God, we can have this conversation, we can have this interaction, but just don't ask me to go anywhere near the church because again, it's broken, it's bad, it's hurtful, whatever that may be. And so there's a lot of individuals. I get the opportunity of connecting with a lot of individuals that that God, we're good. Just don't send me back into one of those places where I have to praise and worship with like-minded individuals.
Right. I think, now that you've said that way, and I appreciate it because you explained it beautifully. Yeah, that was what I was thinking was that there are so many men where if you ask them, why don't you go to church anymore? Well, how come you're not active, in your faith-based community, whatever it might be? It's never about God. It's
Yeah.
never about their belief. It's about the people that have just rubbed them the wrong way or judged them too harshly or didn't give them the time of day when they needed it. And it's been that kind of thing. So I think I've
Yes.
seen a lot more of that than I ever realized I had seen.
You know, it's interesting because again, I think the dynamic, if we set the expectation that, we're going to step on each other's toes,
Hmm.
but when we do, let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. And guess what? I'm walking out the following of and the promptings of who Jesus died and redeemed me to be. But the dynamic of that is that's not perfect. And so I may say something that may offend you. If I do, then guess what? Let's have a good conversation. You can make me further aware. Hey, Brady, do you realize when you said that? Boy, that was really mean. What would I say? Oh, you're right. That was really mean. Boy, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention because
Yeah.
then I actually can have the ability to grow and the opportunity of actually practicing what Jesus did all throughout scripture and actually empowers us to do is, hey, you know what? I'm so sorry. Hey, how do we move forward in this? And it gives us the opportunity of practice and vulnerability and transparency and the opportunity of true strength through those areas, vulnerability and transparency as men.
Hmm. No, I like that. I like that. It's a great idea too. Hey, I offended you. Let's talk about it. What do you know?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that just doesn't happen anymore. But I like the idea of trying to bring it back because somebody has to try somewhere to start bringing it back.
Well, and the idea you hurt my feelings, so I'm taking my dolls and going home, kind of things like that. And again, I can
Right.
say that, I've got a lot of dolls that I've collected over the years from taking them and going home. But the idea of like, okay, how do I process this really from the standpoint of, hey, that hurts. And really allowing the true healer of heaven really to be embraced in the pain that we're experiencing and really allowing that beauty for ashes transaction so that therefore we're empowered to go back and say, okay, now the internal components that really allow me to be offended, that allow me to really be hurt, it's been processed. Now, as a result, it's not about me trying to one up you or try to rub your nose in it. It's about the idea of saying, hey, how do we do life together now? And how do I make you aware? And then how do you make me aware? And from that, guess what? A good, hard, we can call them hard, just a good conversation can come out of it.
Nice. Nice. Let me, I'm not sure if it'll be the same topic or not, but I saw also on some things that you wrote, it was, you were talking about getting pain out of the body. And I
Yes.
wondered, is that a spiritual reference? Is this some sort of, physical therapy thing that I haven't heard about yet? Because I know a lot of guys in pain, and a lot of us have trouble with pain in our body. So, what were you
Sure.
referring to in that one?
That's a great question. Absolutely great question. So if I kicked you in the shin, which of course I wouldn't, you're a bigger guy and you hurt me, and that's why usually I sit by the door in the therapy room so I can get out of there a lot quicker. Because again, most people would hurt me, and this is usually how I start a session, really from that standpoint, to add a little bit
Okay.
of humor, but yet from the standpoint of establishing the foundation of the dynamic of emotion and the part that the mind plays. And so if I kicked you in the shin, the dynamic of feeling it first would take place. And I usually asking a question, hey, would you feel it first or would you think about it first? And for a lot of individuals, they sit there and they think, not a trick question. I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just trying to see where you are. And then some individuals are reluctant to actually give me an answer because they're scared that they're going to get it wrong. And I'm like, hey, no wrong answer. Well, there is a wrong answer, but to me, it's going to be okay. Actually, you're going to feel it first. And the dynamic of how we experience things from our emotional brain at the very beginning. And in that moment, the brain and body needs the mind to actually give it the vernacular and or words. And if the mind hasn't been trained or taught to turn inward and actually tell the brain and body what's going on so that the soul, the mind, and the brain and body, the body can work in tandem, but if the mind has never been taught to turn inward, then out of what it believe that it's being kind is it turns outward. And this is where Freud gets into self-defense mechanisms. Hey, let the mind's aware and the brain and body, hey, something's going on. I just got kicked, that hurt, whatever it may be. And the mind, if it doesn't turn inward, it's trying to create this defense, this protective measurement. And because of that, the repression of that pain gets pushed in the body. And so early on, when we're three, when we're four, and we scrape our elbow or we nick our knee, we run to our parent or we run to the caregiver and we're like, oh, hurt, hurt, and we're looking for someone to kiss our boo-boo, right? And I'm
Right.
not sitting there thinking, well, that kid tripped me. Boy, maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe he should have tied his shoe. They don't go to this conscious awareness and this conscious understanding like we do as adults. Wow, Brady kicked me in my knee. What, is he really that bad of a guy, or is he having a bad day? As a kid, they're like, oh my word, that hurts. And the dynamic of us actually acknowledging, allowing the mind to turn inward to tell the brain and body what's going on so that these two parts, if I can call them parts, can work in tandem so that they're not arm wrestling themselves. So therefore, if we can actually invite God into that pain. So now all three are assimilated into one. Well, Brady, I'm a believer. Yes. And guess what? God wants in all things, even the things that take place when your therapist is going to kick you in the knee during a session, which of course that doesn't happen, but using that as an illustration, right? And the idea of that is now that all three are in one and we've invited true peace, true kindness, true love, true faithfulness, true all of who he is in that moment of pain. Now we can really express his, as his beauty comes in, we can express the ashes, the pain to him and really walk through that process so that we can actually get to the transformation of where he wants us to be, which is what? To renew our mind, to be transformed. How? By the renewing of our mind. And so in that moment, pain has a message. What is that message that I can take and adopt and carry? And then what is that as I transact that to the point of actually getting to the message that Jesus actually wants me to understand, to orientate to, and start meditating on so that gets in me. And I can actually operate in love because he is love. So therefore, I can actually go back in love and have a conversation. Hey, Brady, you just kicked me in the shin. Hey, can you help me understand why I came to you for therapy and you're kicking me in the knee? What is going on? And in that, the idea of releasing that is what I mean by that dynamic of how the body holds on to pain until it's actually released. And so much of the time, people are like, "Well, Brady, I'm not thinking about the pain." Well, you're not consciously. but your body's aware of it. It's like if this was a soda can and I got it off the shelf at the very beginning, guess what? There'd be some pliability to it. I'd be able to squeeze it. But the moment that I shook it, guess what? There'd be internal pressure. It would be really, really tight and it'd push out against the container. Well, we're very similar to that. And the moment that pain comes to us, if we don't actually allow the mind to turn inward, to actually give it the vernacular and the words, invite God into that process and start releasing it, then all that pain gets repressed into us. And where does that go? It hangs out until when? Until we, like the soda can, open it and let all that pressure out. And so we can actually be walking around with all this pressure. And yet, the goodness of God being on a relentless pursuit to make us aware, He's poking at all these areas. Why? So that we become aware. Why? So we invite Him in. Just as I talked about earlier, God was sitting there asking me a very question, and I wasn't even having it. And He was poking, and I needed to hear it. And it took me a while to actually get to the place of willingness through awareness to say, well, you keep asking me this question. Apparently, you know something. Of course, mine was shaking my fist saying, no, I don't. Is that what you want to hear from me? But really getting vulnerable and transparent before Him and saying, but you know what? I want to. We start coming into my lack of trust. And as you come in, God, I want to give you my lack of trust so that therefore I can actually learn to trust you more in this process. And like I said, each and every day there's an ability, there's an opportunity to take a step closer to that. And so the idea is there physical pain? There can be, because emotional pain can impact the body to the point of actually causing physical pain. But how do we release this mental and emotional pain so that therefore we're not really a pressurized system waiting to go off?
Absolutely fantastic answer. Um, the average person on the street who's hearing this right now is listening to what you're saying and saying that that may be, that's all well and good, but
Mhm.
I haven't had a relationship with God for a while. I'd like to, but I'm not. It's not strong. I'm feeling what you're telling me right now. Okay, Brady, I'm hearing what you're saying. How do I start if I'm not in my faith already? I mean,
Yeah.
because then you know where to start. But if I'm,
Sure.
between, or if I'm not quite there, how do I begin getting rid of that pain and asking God to take that from me?
Great question. I think one of the biggest things is awareness, right? The idea that if we can sit there and start through the process by first acknowledging it, just like that little kid's going to run to mom and dad, they're aware of the pain and they're wanting mom and dad to actually sit there and say, "Hey, let me kiss your boo boo," because again, if mom and dad say, "Get out of here with that," now they got two pains. And I know for us as dads, sometimes we're trying to give our kids a little grit in the process, but there's a way to do that. And so the dynamic of we can actually be the what's the word I want to say? The culprit to the ones that invalidate the pain. Well, what is invalidation? Is it agreement? Well, no, agreement's great. And I know a lot of people say, well, I can validate what I agree with. But if it's about agreement, then we'll miss a lot of opportunities of actually validating. Validating is to I see, I hear, I understand, or I want to understand. And how do we actually validate our own pain from the standpoint of actually acknowledging it? And I think to answer your question, that's really where we start is, hey, what's going on in me right now? What am I feeling and what am I thinking? To look introspectively. And that's just really saying, hey, how do I take a deep look of what's taking place inside me? And how do I actually just start writing things down? Well, Brady, if I write stuff down, that means that other people can find it. Understandably so. And I know that that can be a little trepidatious about the idea of writing down things. So I always like to tell people, write it, read it, and then shred it. Well, Brady, if I wrote it, why do I need to read it? Because the way that the body works is so beautiful that God is on a relentless pursuit to make us aware. And in the process, as we're consciously aware of writing things down, guess what? The subconscious, it leaks over and it comes out. And we may not even be aware. What does it happen all the time? Not necessarily, but I tell people all the time, just read it. Go back and read it. Brady, come on. I wrote it. I don't really need to go back and read it. Hey, humor me if you will. And they'll come back and they'll be like, Brady, look at this statement. And I'm like, cool. What does this mean? I don't understand. And they're like, I didn't write that. Well, I was like, well, who wrote it? Well, no, Brady, I wrote it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So kind of like what we talked about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that you're aware, what do you feel like we're supposed to do with it? And I think that that's kind of the big thing is awareness to willingness. Okay. How aware are we of the pain that we've experienced through the duration of life? how do we really sit down and kind of take an inventory, if you will? What's in me that was never a part of God's original design? And I like to talk a lot about pain. And I know a lot of times when we talk about use that word, it's usually physical, but there's mental, there's emotional, there's relational, there's sexual. There's all different complexities of different types of pain. And so really sitting down, I always like to call it like an emotional inventory, if you will, 30 seconds for 30 days, and really allowing yourself to kind of sit with your thoughts and saying, okay, hey, what am I feeling right now? And what am I thinking? So that we are actually strengthening the mind to turn inward and actually work with the mind, the brain and body, so that the two can actually work with each other in tandem. So as this becomes strengthened, then we're at a place that we can start inviting God. Hey, God, right now I hurt. Okay, now what do I do? Oh, hey, God, would you come into that hurt? Okay, then what, Brady? Well, right then, that's pretty foundational. That's pretty foundational. And
Yeah.
really where it all starts is in that awareness piece.
Nice. Nice. Love that answer. You have also talked about how to foster effective communication in a marriage. Now, is that along the same type of lines as, getting the pain out of the body and connecting with God and bringing God into the marriage? Or is there another, path on that?
Great question. I think, because we lean into things that are loving and accepting, and we lean away from things that are painful and rejecting, the dynamic of, again, if you aren't a good dancer like myself, then you're going to step on your wife's toes a ton. And I don't mean that just physically if you're dancing, but the dance of life, the dance of marriage. And so much of the time, if my wife, well, it'd probably be a better, more realistic illustration if I talked about myself, because again, if there's one of the two of us that have done something wrong in the complexity of our relationship, it's not her, it's gonna be me. Just being honest, just being
That's a good
honest.
start. That's a great place to start from. So,
Great start. Just absolutely. Again, not perfect, but she's almost right there on that very verge. And so, to me, she averages our report card out pretty nicely. I kind of
uh,
pull up the back of the line where she's at the beginning of the line. So I'm grateful that I get to, we're one, and I get to average out in her report card, so to say. But in that, if I've done something to her, or again, I guess for an illustration, if she does something, or I believe that she's done something to me, because everything that we do says something. What I do, what I don't do, what I say, and what I don't say communicate something in me and communicate something to her. And so knowing how women are so innate, meaning they feel. And so I can walk through the house, and even though I can't really talk about my sessions by any means of measurement, I can walk through the house and my wife's in the kitchen cooking dinner, and she's like, "Hey, what happened?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What happened today?" It was a good day. I'm like, oh, you're right. 20 years of marriage, you feel your spider senses are kind of tingling, and so it's time, hey, just had some rough sessions. And so the dynamic of for us as guys, I think a lot of times we want to protect our wives by, well, if they really know what's going on, how can I protect them in that? But by not allowing them to know what's going on, they feel something's going on. And by us not really giving them that they connect the dots, then all of a sudden something's off, and it really does impact them significantly. And so knowing that's part of this, but also from the standpoint, if we interpret pain, if we experience pain by the other individual and we don't process it, well, Brady, they stepped on my toes. I need to go give it to them. I need to go and make sure that they're aware of that. I'm going to go get, okay. But my question is, when? Right now, Brady. Oh, okay. Well, if you do that, what's going to be permeating off of you is this pain. And if we feel before we think, so this is going to be coming out the door, and this is going to be as you're coming to them, they're going to feel all of this. And so when they feel all this, they're going to be trying to figure out what is that and why does that, and they're trying to, and you're having this conversation the entire time where they're trying to determine, hey, is this safe? What's taking place? And you walk away thinking, boy, I really gave it to them. And I always like to ask the question, well, how much of that do you think that they really received? Well, all of it, Brady. I'm like, well, to be realistic, maybe this on a good day. Maybe
right.
this on a good, because they were so busy trying to determine what's safe and what's not. Well, Brady, I'm safe. I've never laid hands on my wife or anything like that. Of course not. But the dynamic of that is we lean into things that are loving and accepting. And in that moment, if I come with unprocessed, unresolved emotions and I'm going to have a conversation, and that's what's really charging me in this conversation, she picks up on that before I even say a word. So, one of the kindest things I can do for myself and for my wife is really process what's going on so that when I do have a conversation from the standpoint of inviting true love in and really processing the pain and inviting him in, now when I go this direction and I come to her and I say, hey, can we talk? She feels that. And as she feels the love and embrace, guess what? She's going to lean in, regardless if she agrees with me or not. We can have a great conversation because why? We're both accepting to that loving dynamic of one within each other. Well, Brady, I do that. I love my spouse. Absolutely. And so it's not so much of the what or the why, but the how. How in this moment are you communicating to the place of really being able to show her how you love her?
Hmm. Now, you wrote a book also, and that's
I
called
did.
Healing the Broken Heart.
Correct. Yes,
So
sir.
is that about what we've been talking about marriage and communication and that kind of thing, or is that on a whole different topic?
It doesn't have a lot of these pieces. A lot of these pieces have been since the book has been written. There's bits and pieces of that, but
Okay.
really it's more of the life of transformation. How do I move from point A to point B, and what does that look like? I think so many of us are wanting to get to point B, and that's all we fixate on, right? Hey, Brady,
Right.
I hear goals. Great, goals are great, but if I only look at where I'm going and I don't acknowledge where I am and the step that I've taken. Well, and people come to me all the time and they're saying, hey, Brady, this is what I was doing since the last session. And I'm be like, great, is that a win? Yeah, but I'm not where I want to be. Oh, okay. They'll come back in. Hey, Brady, here's what I'm doing. And okay, hey, is that a win? Well, yeah, but I'm not. And so really from their standpoint, all they can see is where they're not instead of where they've been and where they are and really seeing that gap and not just, hey, this is where I want to be. Okay, great. But look at where you started and look at where you are. That creates anticipation, that creates expectation, that creates hope. And that hope, taking that step, will be there as you go to bed that night and get up the next day to create this energetic flow to be ready to take another step. But I've seen so many individuals that have sat down because of apathy, and they're sitting there saying, "Well, Brady, I never got to where I wanted to be." Well, is that because we only focused on where we wanted to be and where we weren't? Because again, that's very pressure oriented, and the dynamic of how pressure really impacts the body. And so it's good to have goals. It's good to see where we want to be, but we need to also understand where are we and how do we take that next step? And when we do take that next step of actually acknowledging that and how important that really is and seeing that as a win so that it creates anticipation within ourselves so that it's ready for us tomorrow so that we can take another step.
Sounds incredibly interesting. That's now this book is available on Amazon right now.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. And if you have a link for that, I can put it in the show notes for people.
Fantastic. I'll make sure
Okay.
you have that.
Yeah. So please do that. Um, hmm. Is this your first book?
It was my first book. It was one of those that God dropped that in my heart, and it was one of those things where you go back to the idea of receiving versus kind of believing. And I remember thinking, well, God, I think my mom will buy it, and I think my wife will buy it. So at least I think I have at least two people that will buy it, and I'm not sure I'll actually break even on this, but you're asking me to write it, and really it became about a project of just personal processing for me. And I really haven't pushed it too hard because I really didn't believe that. Why would anybody want to read this? Why would anybody really want to read anything that I've got to say or anything like that? Hey, mom, thanks for buying it. I think that maybe a few other individuals have bought it. But really from the standpoint of how impacting our belief system is and how so many of us ever never really get to where we want to be because we don't really believe we can actually get there. And how in my own life, I'm seeing that on a constant of how God's sticking his finger right there and being like, hey, Brady, what would it look like if you really truly believed me at my very word? Could you walk on water like Peter did when he accepted the word? Oh, no, well, I don't know, God. I want to get there. Could you stand up like the guy that had been sitting at the pool of Bethesda for 38 years and probably couldn't even pick up his head because he had been laying there for 38 years, but within one word, he stood up? Oh, wow. So I'm on this journey for my own personal development and wanting to walk alongside people and encourage them. What's the word that's been holding me back? And then not only that, but what's the word that he wants to give you to allow you to move forward in the direction that he's calling you to? And so I'm having a lot of fun doing that as he's stirring that within myself. And as I have the ability to walk alongside men and women, marriages, to encourage them about the words that he wants to give them so that they can move forward.
It's a blessing to have to be pursuing work, to have a job or a career where you are also pursuing all of your own goals, and things like that.
Yes, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not only the president, but I'm an active member. I think I butchered that. I'm not really sure how that, but again, I'm not only how does that terminology go?
Are you
I'm not
talking
the,
about the hair loss for men, Ed?
well, I guess we could go there. Look, I probably need a little bit to kind of fill in here, but I think the
Yeah.
dynamic, it's one of those things we don't graduate from. The idea, well, Brady, hey, you teach this, yeah, and where I teach a lot from is, um, from my vulnerabilities. Like when I do a lot of parenting, people are like, "Well, Brady, you're teaching this stuff, so therefore you may not have to experience. You must not be dealing with this." And I always like to say, I've got three kiddos, and if they were here right now, they'd be questioning you, why are you listening to this guy? And I'd be like, "Hey, now it's not nice. Hey, Lee." But they're my heroes. They're my mentors. They show me so much about what life looks like to be a child,
Mhm.
to be that childlikeness and that opportunity of still vulnerabilities where I need to grow further as a result. And it's amazing how we have the ability to not only teach and train the younger generation, but what the younger generation can do for us to be able to give us an outlook if we're open to that.
Absolutely. We can certainly learn from those young whippersnappers at some point. It's not
We
that easy
can.
to not that easy to swallow your pride and do, but it's definitely possible. So I'm an empty
Absolutely.
nester, so I've learned a lot from my children. It's really
So
been a
you're right.
journey.
So you're writing children's books for the rest of us then, right?
I'm doing podcasts for,
Oh,
for everybody
gotcha.
else. This is my medium right here. So
Right.
that's wonderful though that you decided to write the book, and basically you got the message. God said, "Hey, do this," and it called you to write the book. So that's awesome. How long's it been out?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's been out a couple years. I'm trying
Oh,
to think
great,
of exactly. It's probably been 4 or 5 years, something like that. Maybe even
good,
a little bit longer. So,
great.
yes, sir.
I'm looking forward to looking that up. Now, you also, I know that you've participated in some podcasting activity before, but you have one that's coming out, it sounds like, right? Or is it already out?
Correct. Correct. No, it's one of those that I'm slowly doing a slow roll
Okay,
there on Rumble and doing some things on YouTube as well, but really trying to build a online curriculum. And so that is still in the work. So I hadn't really been able to offer that to people just yet
cool.
because sometimes I'm sitting there thinking like, let's build the boat out in the ocean. And my wife's one of those that's very meticulous, and it's like, well, it doesn't look nice. And I'm like, that's okay, that's fine. They'll be fine with it. And as you can tell, God really brought me a suitable helper because the meticulous details, I'm like, we don't really care about those. And again, grateful that I'm not a surgeon or anybody of a profession that really needs those minute details.
Right.
But we're in the process of trying to build that so that we can offer that to individuals that can find value in that.
That's great. Your wife sounds like a pretty amazing person.
She is. She really is. If, to put up with me, it's a full-time job. She really is amazing. She is a first grade teacher. And just like every kiddo, we've got three kiddos. We've got a 13-year-old, a 12, I see a 14-year-old, excuse me, a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. I had to think, usually my wife's the one that's trying to tell me how old they are. It's like, how old are you? What grade are you in? Dad, you should know this stuff. That's right, I should. And we'll be sitting next to it and they'll be, hey, Dad, where's mom? I'm like, hey, what do you need? I need to know where mom is. And so they'll go upstairs and I'll hear my wife being like, well, where's dad? I'm like, I try to tell them what is it that it's amazing how my kiddos think, does dad, what does dad really know? I know where mom is. And then I can point you into the direction of knowing, hey, here's where mom is, and she's going to have the answer for you. So
Right, exactly. That's fantastic ages right there. Just, I mean, I miss those ages so much. Those early teen years when they were playing sports and interacting, and they still cared about being at home once in a while. It was
oh,
great back then. So
yeah,
cherish those days.
I'm trying. I most certainly am. The idea of when you think about 18 years, you're like, well, I've got plenty of time. But it's amazing how you close your eyes one
Mm,
one day and all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, what age are you? You
right.
can't be. You can't be. And of course, we went last night. My oldest had a track meet. And of course, we see her. We're like, hey. And she walks by and we're like, okay, okay. We're the parents that are embarrassing our daughter. And I'm like, okay, be careful because I can go full fledged in this. I can all paint up with air horns and stuff. And I'm like, okay, how do I want to play this? Do I want to play the part where she may never talk to me again because I embarrass her so greatly? Or do I play the opportunity the parent where I'm like, okay, I'll play it cool and I'll give you a hug when no one's watching, kind of things like that. So um
Wow.
still up in the air of how I want to play this out. But again, for last night, we decided not to paint up and we left the air horns at home. So
You're a better man than I am because I mean I'm one who I coached them every chance I had so that I was completely involved with it. And then when they got up to a certain level and I couldn't coach it anymore because the high school had hired full-time guys, I volunteered to run the events. So while they're over there doing shot put and discus, I'm the one running the event for them, going, "All right, get in there. I'm watching your feet. Don't foul,"
that's right.
because they were like, "I'm never getting away from my dad. Just never getting away from dad."
That's okay. That's okay. I keep telling them, they're like, Dad, I'm going to go to school in Florida. I'm like, okay, great. I'll open a practice out there in Florida. And they're like, Dad, really? I'm like, wherever you go, I will follow. You're like, really? And you're going to be one of those helicopter parents. You call me whatever you want. I don't care. I mean, I'm going to be involved. I want to make sure I'm going to be there for you. And they're just like, fine. I'm like, okay, now that I have you kind of beaten down, not beaten down with the idea that, hey, guess what? Dad's going to be around for a long time, and I'm going to be that dad.
Sure. Let me ask you this, and it wasn't on your
Listen,
list, so this is going to be a challenge for you. But
okay,
I
okay.
think you're definitely up to the task. The With everything you're talking about, you talk a lot about connecting men to God and bringing God into your life to take your pain, help with your marriage, help with communication. Um, what advice do you have for parents who might be trying to figure out how they connect their kids with their faith, especially in a world like this, where it's almost frowned upon? Kids these days are almost worried that people know that they have some faith because it's almost persecuted, in some areas. What advice do you have for a dad, for instance, who's trying to at least make sure that that's in his son's life or his daughter's?
Great question. I think the idea of engaging them personally, because again, it's really difficult to instruct or guide or direct if that equity is not built
Yeah,
and the dynamic of that. So I think that that is foundational. What is it that your boy, your girl is interested in? How do you show an interest in them because of who they are to you? And I think that that is foundational. I think about Paul when he came to the Athenians, right? The idea of them having all these shrines all around, and he could have come and said, "What are y'all doing?" Kind of kicked them all over, and how dare y'all? But the dynamic of that is he embraced them, he connected with them, and he waited for his opportunity. Now, who is this? And they explain the shrine and this shrine and that shrine and that. Well, what's this one too? This is the God of the unknown. Oh, cool. You want to know his name? And so I think that if we take a very similar approach to that, how do we connect with our kids? What is it that they're interested in? Like I've got two boys and a little girl, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, my boys like to game, and of course they get opportunities on Saturday, and so I'll jump up there, and even though some of the video games, they're like, Dad, you're not supposed to do that. I'm like, oh, I'm probably butchering the game or whatever it may be, but how do I engage them in what's important to them? And how do I just be in the middle of that? So the opportunities is as they feel like I'm a part of them, as I'm a part of something that they're interested in, then those type of conversations really can evolve from that. My little girl, she loves playing games, and so we'll be playing um, Uno or whatever it is. And so in that, there's great opportunities of asking questions. Hey, so how's your Bible class? Hey, math. I know that math was really, really difficult. Hey, how'd you do on your math test? And really building that equity and that connection. So therefore, because I think for us as parents, including myself, we're really wanting to make sure, hey, how do I get them on that path of the straight and narrow? And how do I do that? And I think really it's built upon the backbone of equity. How well do we know our kiddos and how well do they know that we know them? And to the point, do they know that we're not just here to make sure, hey, you did that right, you did that wrong. Hey, but really embrace them. Hey, I am for you. Hey, do you know I'm for you? So therefore, the opportunities, I think, they kind of flow out of that equity and those opportunities.
Love that answer because the entire thing is rooted in you taking the responsibility for leading them. I mean, you go meet them where they are, but then you lead them to, where you're trying to take them. And
Yes,
I think that's just paramount, something that I talk about all the time. It's something that you and I, briefly talked about before the show started. So I think maybe that's a good place to kind of maybe wrap things up a little bit.
that'd be awesome.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on, the importance of, and in so many different ways, of, fathers leading their families to where they need to
Absolutely.
go.
Absolutely. And I think that, there's so many individuals that we can look at somebody else and saying, well, this is how they're leading and they're tremendously successful. So I need to replicate that. And again, the dynamic of that may work for that individual. And but if we try to replicate something that it's not intended for us to replicate. Now, again, the dynamic of making sure our families are in church or whatever that may be, but the dynamic of who is your family and how do you pour into them? I think that that's the dynamic of, as Jesus said, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. And so for us as men, the dynamic of going to work or whatever our responsibility is in the home, how do we make sure that we're serving our wife? How is it that we're serving our kids in ways that they can see the character and nature of Christ in us? So therefore, we have those foundational pieces to be able to have some of those conversations. Hey, son, guess what? We're gonna get up early on Saturday. We have to get up early on Saturday. Hey, yeah, but guess what? We're gonna go mow some yards. We're gonna mow some yards too. Yeah, but guess what? Afterwards, wait, we'll go get a hamburger. Oh, and then my middle one, boy, he is motivated by food. It doesn't matter. I mean, literally anything and everything. It doesn't. He just wants to know about food. Hey, what are we having? I mean, he wants the menu. So the dynamic of how do I speak their language? And from the standpoint, how do I make sure I'm processing my emotions, taking care of my mental health, making sure I'm in a good place with Christ? Because I feel like as long as I am connecting with Him and from the standpoint of listening and praying and doing the things foundational that He's called me to do, I think the idea is I don't have to go around saying, I'm the dad, I'm the husband, and kind of demanding that they follow me. Hey, I am healthy here. Please come on. It's the dynamic of, hey, guys, we're going this direction. And so, from the standpoint like Jesus with the disciples, guess what? Hey, this is where we're going. Okay, cool. Even though they had a lot of questions, they're like, hey, I wonder why we're going to the other side. I don't know. It's going to be pretty cool when we get there. I think that as we serve them and as we have the um, the understanding of who He is and who we are in Him, I think that we lead by following. And as we lead by following Him, I think what it does is it creates an empowerment that our wives and our kids follow us as we follow and lead them.
Love it. Absolutely. I love that. That was a fantastic answer in terms of, leading your family. And, Brady, I want to thank you for coming on today and in giving everything that you've just given everybody, because it's not just, a bunch of talk about, well, this is how you should be. You've been telling everybody for the last hour, this is how you do it. And I think that's incredibly helpful to people who are going to listen to this today. Thank you for bringing that with you today.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity and just what you're doing for men, what you're doing for husbands and fathers, and just creating value for them to be able to have a place to turn to find applications to get stronger. And when I say that, that's not because they're weak. I say that because again, we're strong in the opportunity of getting stronger, and that you build a foundation and you have that as a platform, and that you invited me to get to come and be a part of that. I am tremendously honored. And I am excited just to know that you have this platform and knowing that you're impacting men everywhere. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it on a lot of levels. And you were great. So again, thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Gentlemen, you've heard another wonderful episode of the Power of Man podcast with another fantastic guest, Brady Daniel, counselor, author, God-fearing man who understands what leadership means and put it in fantastic words today. I hope that it helped somebody out there. You guys all know that we do this podcast because if at the end of the day we've helped one person become a better man tomorrow than they are today, then we're doing our jobs. And the reason that we do that, guys, the reason we bring powerful men like this on here for you is because you matter. You have value and you have worth. And one of these days, You're just going to have to believe it. Until next time.